Before we go into the mud and the blood and the screaming, let me ask you something. Have you ever made a choice so small? A left step instead of a right, a word left unsaid, a trigger pulled a second too late, that it rewrote everything? Now imagine you remember every single version of that rewrite. Every death, every betrayal, every time you held your best friend while he bled out, only to wake up 5 minutes earlier, heart still full of his blood, knowing you have to let him die again to save the rest. This is not a superpower. This is a curse with dog tags. My name is Sergeant Elena Vasquez, and I have died 347 times to keep 42 people alive. This is the one time it finally worked. The first time I died, it was a Tuesday. That's not dark humor. That's just what my brain logged before the 7.62 round turned my skull into a question mark. Tuesday, 14:37 local. Temperature 38 degrees Celsius. Wind east-northeast at 6 knots. The smell of diesel, sweat, and the specific rot of a village that had been empty for 3 days but still remembered the people who'd been dragged from their beds. I remember all of it, every time. But let me start with the one that stuck. We were called Raven Team. For operators, one mission. Secure a rooftop LZ for a downed CIA asset in the northern pocket of the Czar Valley. The kind of valley that maps don't name, because maps are written by people who've never tasted their own fear. I was the team leader, 29 years old, 6 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment, then 2 more in an experimental unit no one would admit existed. The brass called it the Kronos Initiative. We called it the Groundhog Loop, after the movie, because someone in the Pentagon had a sense of humor blacker than burnt coffee. My team, Staff Sergeant Marcus Mack, Chun, 34, married, father of twin girls, former recon Marine who laughed at incoming fire like it was a bad date. Specialist Tanya, tank, Okonkwo, 26, 6 feet of muscle and silence, demolition expert who spoke 3 languages and never raised her voice above a whisper. And Corporal David Priest Martinez, 22, medic the youngest who still believed in God and the Geneva Convention in equal measure. They didn't know about the loop. No one did except the doctors in white coats who'd injected something into my cervical spine 2 years ago after a training accident flatlined me for 4 minutes. When I woke up, I could remember things that hadn't happened yet. Or rather, I could remember things that had happened, but only to me in timelines that collapsed the moment I made a different choice. The science was garbage. The effect was not. Vasquez, we have eyes on the objective. Matt's voice came through the bone mic, low and steady. He was on the eastern ridge, lying prone under a thermal blanket that made him look like a dead bush. Through my binos, I could see the rooftop, a 3-story concrete building with a faded Coca-Cola sign painted on the side. The LZ was marked with a single orange panel weighted down by sandbags. No hostiles visible. That worried me more than gunfire. Tank, status on the north alley? I asked. Tank's whisper came back. Clear, but there's fresh tire tracks. 2 vehicles, light tactical, parked and left within the hour. Priest was beside me, pressed against the cracked wall of a secondary structure 50 meters from the LZ. He was checking his medical kit for the 3rd time. Nervous habit. Sergeant, the asset signal is moving. Not holding position. I looked at my watch. 14:39. In 3 minutes, the first sniper would fire from the water tower southwest of our position. I knew this because I'd lived it 42 times before this moment. In the first loop, the sniper had killed Mac. In the 12th, he'd hit Tank. In the 31st, he'd missed me, but wounded Priest, and the subsequent infection from the field surgery had taken him 3 days later in a dusty aid station while I held his hand and lied about his chances. Every loop taught me something. Every death carved a new scar on a brain that couldn't forget. Change of plan, I said. Mac, shift your position 50 meters north. There's a sniper in the water tower. He hasn't seen us yet, but he will. Mac didn't question. That's why I loved him. Copy, shifting. A rustle of fabric, then nothing. Tank, the tire tracks lead to a secondary IED buried under the 3rd trash pile from the north entrance. Don't step on it. Mark it for EOD when we extract. A pause. How do you know it's there? Because I can see the disturbed earth from here. Trust me. She trusted me. That was the part that broke something inside me every single loop. These people, my people, they trusted me with their lives, and I repaid that trust by letting some of them die so I could learn how to save the rest. The math was monstrous. But the math worked. We moved. The rooftop was 20 seconds of exposed sprint across open ground. In loop 7, I'd gone first and taken a round through the shoulder. In loop 19, I'd sent Priest and watched him crumple. In loop 53, we'd all made it, only to find the asset had already been executed. That one had ended with Tank crying in the helicopter and me lying to the debrief officer about what we'd seen. This time I went first, not because I was brave, because I was the only one who could afford to die. I ran. The ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel. My boots kicked up dust that tasted like ancient bones. The weight of my plate carrier pulled at my shoulders, 40 pounds of ceramic, magazines, radio, and the guilt of 300 memories. I counted my strides. 1, 2, 3. The water tower was a black skeleton against the white sky. The sniper would be adjusting his scope now. 4, 5, 6. I heard the crack a second before the round hit the wall behind me. Missed by a foot. Loop 67 had taught me to zig left on the 7th stride. I dove behind the low wall at the base of the rooftop building. Contact west, water tower. Mac, you have a shot. Mac's reply was a single round. Then another. Then the wet thud of a body hitting metal scaffolding. Sniper down. Secondary position emerging from the South Mosque. 3, no for fighters. AKs and 1 RPG. The mission was already falling apart. It always fell apart. The question wasn't whether we would survive. The question was how many of us would be left when the chopper came. Tank reached the wall beside me, breathing hard but silent. She carried her M4 like an extension of her body. RPG's a problem. If they get shot at the LZ, the asset's extraction bird won't land. Priest slid in next to her, face pale, but hands steady. I can suppress from the east window of the building. Give me 2 minutes to get upstairs. I looked at the building. 3 stories. Stairs on the interior. Windows facing south and west. In loop 81, Priest had gone up alone and been trapped when the stairs collapsed. He'd jumped from the 3rd floor and broken both ankles. We'd carried him to the bird, and he'd saluted me through the morphine haze. That was the loop where I'd learned about the structural weakness in the stairwell. No, I said. Stairs are compromised. Tank, you and Priest take the east wall. Use the drainage pipe to get to the 2nd floor, then breach the window. I'll hold the ground floor and draw their fire. That's a one-man suicide post, Tank said. Not an accusation. An observation. Probably. I smiled. It felt like a skeleton's grin. But I'm harder to kill than I look. They moved. Tank went first, climbing the pipe with a grip strength that had made her a state wrestling champion in high school. Priest followed, slower but steady. I watched them disappear through the 2nd floor window, then turned to face the 4 fighters advancing from the south. The first one was young. 17, maybe. His uniform was too big, his finger on the trigger of an AK that he held like a garden hose. He'd never fired it in combat before. I knew this because in loop 12, he'd shot Mac in the throat by accident while trying to clear a jam. The 2nd fighter was older, bearded, confident. He was the real threat. The 3rd and 4th hung back, covering the flanks. I raised my M4. The young one saw me first. His eyes went wide. I had maybe 2 seconds before he yelled. I didn't shoot him. In loop 93, I'd killed him. Dropped him with a double tap to the chest. And the bearded fighter had gone berserk, charged my position with a grenade in each hand, and killed all 3 of us when they detonated. In loop 104, I'd wounded him instead, and the bearded fighter had hesitated, dragging the boy to cover, buying us enough time for the extraction. The lesson was brutal, but clear. Sometimes mercy was strategy. I fired 2 rounds into the ground 3 feet in front of the young fighter. Dirt exploded. He screamed and stumbled backward. The bearded fighter grabbed him by the collar and yanked him behind a low wall. Shouts in Pashto. Angry. Confused. Then a burst of suppressing fire that cracked over my head. I ducked behind the wall, heart hammering. That bought me 90 seconds. Maybe less. Tank, status on the RPG? Neutralized. Priest put a round through the launcher tube. They're not firing that thing again. A pause. We have the asset. He's alive, but bad shape. Dehydrated, possible broken ribs, and he's talking nonsense about something called the recall code. My blood went cold. The recall code. In loop 211, the asset had mentioned that. I dismissed it as trauma-induced delirium. Then loop 212 had shown me what it really was, a dead man switch tied to a satellite uplink. If the asset didn't transmit a specific 14-digit code within the next 45 minutes, a drone strike would level this entire valley, including us. The mission had never been a rescue. It had been a cleanup. The CIA wanted their man back, but if they couldn't have him, they wanted no witnesses. "Get him down here," I said. "We're leaving in 10 minutes. More gunfire from south. The bearded fighter had rallied his men. They were advancing in a bounding overwatch, two moving, two covering. Smarter than I'd given them credit for. In loop 130, this exact tactic had pinned us down for 20 minutes, and the drone had hit while we were still on ground. I needed a new plan. I needed to think through 17 failed timelines in the space of a breath. The young fighter popped up from behind the wall. His AK chattered. Rounds hit the concrete beside my head, showering me with dust. I didn't flinch. I'd been shot in 34 different ways across the loops. A near miss was just a memory I hadn't collected yet. Then I heard the whistle. Incoming mortar. From the east. The fighters didn't have mortars. That meant a third party, maybe the local militia, maybe a different insurgent cell. In loop 160, a mortar had killed Tank instantly. I'd carried her body to the bird, and Priest had cried the whole way home. Incoming. I shouted. East side, take cover. The round hit 30 meters behind me. The shockwave punched the air out of my lungs. My ears rang. I rolled to my knees and four up and saw the bearded fighter stumbling, clutching his face. Shrapnel. His own men were dragging him back. The young fighter was gone. Fled or dead, I didn't know. "Sergeant, we're coming down the pipe." Priest's voice strained. "Asset's too weak to climb. We need a ladder or a lift." There was no ladder. There was no time. The second mortar round would land in 15 seconds. I knew this because in loop 160, the second round had landed 14 seconds after the first. The third round would land 7 seconds after that. Pattern fire. Adjust, kill. Tank, drop the asset from the window. I'll catch him. He's 180 pounds, and you're concussed. Do it. She did it. The asset, a man named Hollis, 50-ish, gray beard, wearing civilian clothes that had once been expensive, fell out of the second-floor window with a scream that cut off when I caught him. Sort of caught him. We both hit the ground hard. His weight drove my left knee into the dirt. Something popped. Pain lanced up my leg. But he was alive. Bruised, crying, but alive. The second mortar round hit 40 meters east. Closer. "Mac, where's that bird?" 90 seconds out. Pilot says the LZ is hot, and he's making one pass only. One pass. That meant we had to be on the roof when the helicopter came, or we were walking home through 60 miles of enemy territory, with a wounded asset and a team that was running on fumes. I looked at the rooftop. 3 stories. No stairs. The drainage pipe was too narrow for the asset. The external ladder on the north side had been cut in loop 74 by local kids who'd used the metal for cooking fires. There was one way. A stupid way. A way that had killed me in loop 230 when I tried alone. Priest, you and Tank take the asset to the north wall. I'll draw the mortar fire south. When I give the signal, you run like hell for the roof. "That's not drawing fire, Sergeant," Priest said. "That's being the target." "Yeah." I pulled the pin on a smoke grenade and rolled it south. The orange smoke billowed, thick and bright. "It's a gift." I ran south, not toward cover, toward the open, toward the mortar team I couldn't see, but knew was there. My knee screamed with every stride. The third mortar round hit 50 meters behind me. Then a fourth adjusting west. Then a fifth closer. I fire my M4 on full auto. Not anything. Just noise. Just presence. Just a girl from El Paso making herself the loudest thing in the valley so her family could live. The sixth mortar round hit 20 meters to my left. The shock wave threw me sideways. I landed on my bad knee and felt something tear. The world went white. Then gray. Then I was on my back, staring at a sky that had too many suns. Not yet, I told myself. Not this loop. I rolled onto my stomach. My M4 was gone. My sidearm was still in its holster. I drew it, a Sig Sauer M17, and fired twice at a fighter who was advancing on me with a machete. He went down. Another took his place. I fired again. Click. Empty. The mortar team had found my range. I heard the 7th round coming. It had my name on it. I'd heard that sound before in a dozen different loops, a dozen different deaths. The whistle that meant the end of timeline. Then, I heard something else. Rotors. The Black Hawk came over the ridge like a metal thunderstorm. Its miniguns opened up, stitching the ground south of my position with a line of 7.62 that turned the mortar team into mist. The seventh round hit the ground 20 meters away, close enough to spray me with dirt, not close enough to kill. Mac was there. I didn't see him coming. He just appeared, grabbed the back of my plate carrier, and dragged me toward the building. "You're an idiot," he said. "You're married," I replied. Both things can be true. He hauled me up the external ladder, the one that had been cut in another life, but not this one. Not this time. Tank and Priest were already on the roof with the asset, who was conscious now, muttering numbers under his breath. The recall code. I needed that code. "Hollis," I said, kneeling beside him. "The code. Give me the code." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I just ran through mortar fire to catch your sorry ass." "Give me the code," or that drone up there. I pointed at the sky, at nothing visible, turns us all to pink mist. He told me the code. 14 digits. I repeated them twice, burned them into a brain that was already crowded with the dead. The Black Hawk landed. We piled in. Tank and Priest strapped the asset to a jump seat. Mac pulled the door closed. The pilot lifted off before the skids had fully settled, and we were airborne, banking hard east, leaving the valley behind. I sat on the floor back against the bulkhead and let my head fall forward. My knee was swelling. My ears were ringing. My hands were shaking. But we were alive. All of us. For the first time in 347 attempts, Raven Team was going home intact. I closed my eyes and waited for the reset. It didn't come. I opened my eyes. The helicopter was still flying. The team was still breathing. The asset was still muttering. No flash of white. No sudden jolt back to the briefing room. No memory of a death. I hadn't yet died. The loop was broken. And that's when I realized the worst part. I had no idea why. The debrief was a nightmare wrapped in a classified stamp. I sat in a windowless room at Bagram for 14 hours, repeating the same story to 6 different intelligence officers, 3 CIA case officers, and one woman in a civilian blazer who never introduced herself, but whose eyes followed my every word like a sniper's reticle. They wanted to know how I'd known about the sniper, how I'd known about the IED, how I'd known to shift Mac 50 meters north. I told them I had good instincts. I told them I'd seen disturbed Earth. I told them the sniper's scope had glinted in the sun. Lies, all of them, but lies that fit inside their understanding of the world. They couldn't handle the truth. The truth would break their brains the way it had broken mine, 100 times over, 1,000 times over. The woman in the blazer, her name, I learned later, was Dr. Voss, pulled me aside after the 6th officer left. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, no makeup, no jewelry, no warmth. She smelled like coffee and antiseptic. "Sergeant Vasquez," she said, "do you know why the Kronos Initiative was shut down?" I knew. I'd read the file in a loop that no longer existed. The side effects were deemed unacceptable. That's what we told Congress. She leaned closer. The truth is, the side effects were impossible. The subjects, there were 7 of you originally. They didn't just remember alternate timelines. They started to live in them. 2 of them stopped eating because they couldn't be sure which meal was real. 3 more attempted suicide because they died so many times that death felt like home. I said nothing. She wasn't telling me anything I hadn't felt in my own bones. "You're the only one left," she continued. "The others are in long-term psychiatric care. But you kept functioning. You kept leading. Do you know why? Because I have people who need me," I said. Dr. Voss studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "No, Sergeant. It's because you're already dead. You died in the training accident. The thing sitting in that chair is a consciousness that no longer has an anchor. You're not remembering alternate timelines. You're creating them. Every time you make a decision, you split reality. And you're the only one who remembers the branches." I felt the floor drop out from under me. Not literally. The floor was concrete. But something inside me, the part that had believed I was still human, fell into a dark place with no bottom. "That's not possible," I whispered. 347 resets, she said. "That's how many times you've died and come back. Do you know how many times the rest of your team has died?" I knew. Idigunta. Mac, 211 times. Tank, 189. Priest, 234. And you kept going? Dr. Voss's voice was almost admiring. You kept trying to find a timeline where everyone lived. And you found it. Congratulations. You're a miracle of modern science and a tragedy of modern ethics. Now here's the problem. She slid a folder across the table. The drone strike was called off because the asset transmitted the recall code. But the asset, Hollis, he wasn't just a CIA officer. He was a defector from a private military contractor called Atlas Group. And Atlas Group has a problem with losing their assets. I opened the folder. Photos, names, dates, a list of 23 people, CIA officers, military personnel, journalists, who had died in the last 18 months. All of them connected to Atlas Group. All of them killed in ways that looked like accidents or insurgent attacks. They're hunting him, I said. They're hunting everyone who knows what he knows. That includes you and your team. You've been read onto a program that doesn't officially exist. Atlas Group has unlimited funding, no oversight, and a kill list with your name on it. I closed the folder. My hands were steady. That surprised me. What do you want me to do? Survive. Dr. Voss stood up. You've beaten death 347 times. Make it 348. And, Sergeant, don't trust anyone. Not even me. She left. The door closed with a click that sounded like a gun being cocked. I sat in the empty room for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone, a secure satellite model, encrypted to hell, and called Mac. Hey, boss, he said. His voice was tired but warm. He was probably lying in his bunk, looking at photos of his daughters on his phone. You okay? Debrief looked rough. I need you to do something, I said. Don't ask why. Just do it. Shoot. Check your weapon. The M4 you carried on the mission. Field strip it. Look at the firing pin. A pause. I heard a moving, the clatter of metal on metal. Then, there's a scratch on the firing pin. Fresh. Looks like a file mark. That wasn't there before the mission. It wasn't, I said. Someone tampered with your weapon. If you'd fired a full magazine, the firing pin would have fractured. You'd have had a dead man's click in the middle of a firefight. Mac was quiet for 5 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. Who? I don't know yet. Check tank, and priest weapons too. And don't tell anyone you're doing it. Not your chain of command, not your friends. Just check and call me back. He called back 10 minutes later. Tank's rifle had a loose gas tube. It would have failed after 3 rounds. Priest's sidearm had a burr on the trigger bar that would have caused a double feed at the worst possible moment. Someone had sabotaged all 4 of our primary weapons before the mission. Someone who knew we were going into that valley. Someone who wanted us to die there. We need to disappear, I said. Right now. Tonight. The girls, Max said. His voice cracked. I can't leave them. You won't. We're bringing them with us. Tank has a sister in Montana. Priest Abuela is in New Mexico. We scatter, we go dark, and we figure out who's trying to kill us. Elena. Mac never used my first name. What happened to you in that valley? You're different. You've been different for months. But today you knew things you couldn't know. I closed my eyes. I could tell him the truth. I could tell him about the loops, the deaths, the memories of holding his hand while he bled out from a wound that hadn't happened yet. Or I could protect him. I could carry the weight alone, the way I always had. Trust me, I said. That's all I can ask. That's enough, he said. We met at the motor pool at 0200. Tank had hotwired a Humvee. She could hotwire anything with an engine. Priest had raided the medical supply tent for enough antibiotics and trauma gear to run a field hospital. Mac had his family photos in his pocket and a Glock in each hand. We drove north, toward the border, toward the mountains, toward a version of the future I hadn't seen yet. In the back of the Humvee, Priest asked me a question. Sergeant, do you ever think about what comes after? After what? After all of this? The missions, the war, the running. Do you think there's a version of us that gets to just live? I thought about the 347 timelines I'd left behind. In some of them, we'd all died. In some, only one of us had survived. In one, the very first loop, the one before I understood what was happening, I'd watched all 3 of them die, and then died myself, and the reset had come so fast that I hadn't even had time to scream. Yeah, I said, I think there's a version, and I think we're going to find it. The Humvee's headlights cut through the dark. Behind us, Bagram shrank to a smear of light. Ahead of us, the mountains waited. I didn't know that Atlas Group had already found us. I didn't know that the driver of the oncoming truck was a dead man walking. I didn't know that the loop wasn't broken. It had just gotten longer. The truck hit us at 70 miles per hour. I remember the headlights. I remember Priest shouting. I remember Mac grabbing Tank's arm. Then the world became a blender of metal and glass and blood. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the wreckage. The Humvee was on its side. My left arm was broken. I could see the bone, white and wrong, pushing against the skin. My helmet had cracked. Blood ran down my face in warm fingers. Mac was crawling toward me. His leg was twisted at an angle that made me want to vomit. Elena, stay with me. The others, I said. Tank's breathing. Priest is gone. I looked. Priest was still in his seat, still strapped in, still wearing his stupid smile. But his eyes were open and empty, and the side of his head had been caved in by the impact. No, not again. Not after we'd made it. Not after I'd finally found the timeline where everyone lived. The world went white. I woke up in the briefing room of Bagram. 0800, the day before the mission. The loop had reset, but not to the moment before the crash. To the moment before the mission. 20 hours earlier. A full day of memories gone, replaced by the cold certainty that I had to save Priest from a death that hadn't happened yet. Dr. Voss was standing over me. You just reset, she said. Not a question. How do you know? Because I've been watching you for 348 loops, Sergeant. I know the signs. The dilated pupils. The tremor in your left hand. The way you smell time. She sat down across from me. The truck that hit you, that wasn't an accident. Alice Group knew you were running. They've been tracking you through the Kronos implant in your spine. I touched the back of my neck. The scar was still there, small and white like a tick bite. Take it out. If we take it out, you lose the ability to reset. The next time you die, you stay dead. Good, I said. Then, I'll make sure I don't die. The surgery took 4 hours. I was awake for most of it. Local anesthesia only because General would have interfered with the neural interface. I felt every cut, every scrape, every moment when the scalpel touched the thing that had made me a monster. When it was over, Dr. Voss held up a small glass vial. Inside was a sliver of metal, no bigger than a grain of rice, covered in my own blood. This is your curse, she said. And now it's gone. I sat up. My head felt lighter, quieter. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't carrying 348 timelines in my skull. I was just me, Elena Vasquez, a soldier with a broken arm and a dead friend and a mission that hadn't started yet. The mission, I said. We have to stop this sabotage. We have to save Priest. You can't, Dr. Voss said. The sabotage was ordered by someone inside your own chain of command. If you expose them, they'll kill you before you can testify. If you don't expose them, they'll try again on the next mission. You're in a maze with no exit. I looked at the vial, at the thing that had made me immortal, at the weight I'd finally put down. Then, I'll make an exit, I said. I found Mac in the chow hall. He was eating eggs that looked like rubber and drinking coffee that looked like motor oil. He saw my face and put down his fork. What happened to you? He asked. I figured something out, I said. About the mission. About the weapons. About all of it. I sat down across from him. Marcus, I need you to trust me. Not because I'm your sergeant. Because I'm your friend. He waited. Someone in our battalion is working for Atlas Group. They sabotaged our weapons. They're going to try to kill us in the valley. And I know how to stop them, but I need you to do exactly what I say when I say it without asking questions. Mac looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. You've never steered me wrong, Vasquez. Not once. That's because I've had practice. We found Tank in the armory, cleaning a rifle that didn't need cleaning. She listened to my plan without interrupting. When I finished, she said one word. Priest. He's the key. We keep him alive, we win. He dies, we lose. Then he doesn't die, Tank said. She picked up a rifle and racked the bolt. Simple. It wasn't simple. Nothing about the Kronos initiative had ever been simple. But for the first time in 349 loops, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. I had Mac's steady hands. I had Tank's quiet fury. I had Priest's stupid smile, still alive, still hopeful, still believing in a god who had let him die in 100 different timelines. We went into the valley. The mission played out almost exactly as it had before. The sniper, the IED, the mortar fire, the asset. But this time, I wasn't reacting to memories. I was reacting to the present. Every decision I made was new. Every risk I took was real. And when the moment came, The moment when the mortar round was supposed to kill Priest, I was there. I tackled him behind the wall. The round hit 30 meters away. Shrapnel tore through my plate carrier. Something hot and sharp lodged in my side. But Priest was alive. Scared, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but alive. "Sergeant," he said, "you're hit." "I know." I looked down. A piece of shrapnel the size of my thumb was sticking out of my lower abdomen. It didn't hurt yet. It would. "Get the asset to the roof. I'll cover you." "You can't cover anyone. You're leaking." I laughed. "It hurt." "Then you better be fast." They made it to the roof. The Black Hawk came. I fired my sidearm until it clicked empty. Then I used my last grenade to keep the fighters back. Then I crawled toward the ladder with one hand pressed against my stomach to keep my insides from becoming outsides. Mac pulled me up. Tank dragged me onto the bird. Priest put his hands on my wound and prayed in Spanish while he packed it with gauze. "Don't you die on me," he said. "Not after all that." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said. The helicopter lifted off. The valley fell away. And for the first time in 349 loops, I closed my eyes without waiting for the reset. I woke up in a hospital in Germany. Mac was in the chair beside my bed, asleep. His phone was on the table, a photo of his twin girls, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth. Tank was standing by the window, looking out at the rain. Priest was nowhere to be seen. "He's getting coffee," Tank said, without turning around. "He's been crying for 3 days. He won't admit it, but his eyes are red." "How long was I out?" 5 days. "You almost died. Twice. The doctor said your heart stopped on the table, but you came back." She turned to face me. "How did you know, Elena?" "About the weapons. About the truck. About all of it." I thought about telling her the truth. About the loops. About the deaths. About the version of her that had cried in a helicopter while holding her own severed arm. About the version of Mac that had saluted me with his last breath. About the version of Priest that had jumped from a third-story window and broken his back. Instead, I said, "I had a dream." Tank looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Must have been one hell of a dream. You have no idea." Dr. Voss came to see me 3 days later. She sat in the chair beside my bed and handed me a folder. "Atlas Group has been neutralized. The mole in your battalion was arrested this morning. The asset, Hollis, is in protective custody. And the Kronos implant has been destroyed." "Good," I said. "There's one more thing." She pulled out a photograph. It was me, younger, smiling, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. "Do you remember this?" I studied the photo. The face was mine, but the eyes were different. Softer, less haunted. "No, that was taken 2 years ago. Before the training accident. Before the implant. Before you died the first time." She put the photo on the table. "The woman in that photo is gone. She died in an operating room in Virginia, and something else woke up in her body. Something that could remember death. Something that could cheat time." I picked up the photo, looked at the girl I used to be. The girl who hadn't watched her friends die 1,000 times. The girl who didn't know what it felt like to hold a man's hand while he bled out from a wound you could have prevented if you just turned left instead of right. "I don't miss her," I said, and I meant it. Dr. Voss raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because she was alone." I put the photo down. "I'm not." Mac woke up. He rubbed his eyes and saw the folder, the photo, the doctor. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything's fine." It wasn't fine. It would never be fine. The memories were still there. 349 timelines, each one a scar on my soul. I would dream about them for the rest of my life. I would wake up screaming on nights when the moon was wrong. I would flinch at loud noises and check my corners twice and never, ever take a single moment for granted. But I would do it with people I loved, people I died for, people who would die for me in any timeline, in any world. And that was enough.